Hello and welcome to the CX Leaders podcast, brought to you by the Customer Xperience Alliance in the UK. My name is Mark Hillary and I am your host here on CX Leaders. This is the first episode of the podcast, although you may have heard me talking about CX over on my own CX Files podcast with Peter Ryan. But here on CX Leaders, we will be focusing on stories of CX leadership from the members of the CX Alliance. Now, one of the most challenging subjects facing everyone in CX at present is artificial intelligence. This creates a number of questions. Which processes can be entirely automated using AI? Which processes can be improved and made more productive using AI? And where can the humans in the loop be more supported using AI? Over the past couple of years, it's become clear that AI is not just a simple replacement for agents in a contact center, and some in the industry are arguing that blended solutions, where the AI supports people, are where we should have been focused all along. Dan Fay, the IT director at Interact Contact Centers, is a good example. Dan is a technical expert in contact center technology and design, but he reports directly to the CEO. So he's keenly aware that any tech he deploys must be tied to a business solution that helps Interact's clients. I recently called Dan to discuss how Interact is using AI today and how he sees the future development of AI across the broader CX environment. Dan, it's great to get you on the podcast. This is the CX Leaders from the Customer Xperience Alliance. Now, first thing, before we get started, I think it would be great just to introduce yourself, your role, and what do Interact Contact Centers do?
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. We are Interact Contact Centers. We're a BPO in the UK and South Africa. I am Interact's IT director.
Well, we're going to be exploring the human advantage because I know that you've published some ideas. I've seen you commenting on stuff to do with how do you build a contact center for the AI age. And obviously, this is something that for the last couple of years, it's really consumed a lot of the conversation around CX. But I think that, talking to you when we were planning this recording, you seem to have some pretty good, interesting ideas about what's actually going on out there. And we do hear especially from the software companies, AI can automate everything. In the early days of the generative AI boom, there were lots of predictions about the end of the contact center. But we can still see that humans, actually involving human agents, offers a genuine competitive advantage. But where do you see that most acutely then? I mean, where do you really see that we definitely still need to maintain humans for this service?
I think for us, there's definitely a feeling of developing trust. So I think we're at a point in the market where people are beginning to trust AI models and AI responses, and really quick fire customer service requirements where people just want to take an action and get it done. I think perfect use cases there, but a lot of customer service inquiries, a lot of sales inquiries still need that sort of extended back and forth. And I don't think we've moved on from people wanting to have that kind of engagement and relationship with another human. And I think that's that's great for our people. And it's great for the customers. I feel at the moment that's still the preferred customer experience, certainly in our lines of business. So, fitting AI into that rather than trying to solve the how can we make this as efficient as possible, rather how can we make the people as efficient as possible. So, those engagements, those complex engagements with customers, rather than focusing on replacing who's serving them, we should be furnishing the agents with the information without them having to try and juggle two things at once, right? Because you're speaking to a customer and you want to have that genuine connection with them, but you're flicking through 3-4 systems, you're trying to type something out while the customer's speaking to you, and that can lead to a disconnect, which can then lead to a bad customer experience because it sort of feels like you might not be paying attention.
Do you have a sort of like a process map then that says, this interaction can be automated because it's very simple, or this interaction, definitely we should deliberately keep this with a human agent because maybe it needs an understanding of customer emotions, for example?
I wouldn't say that we have a process map. I would say it comes up often in conversations. I mean, as a BPO, we're in a position to see a lot of different clients, a lot of different customer bases, and we work quite closely with all of our clients to try and build a lot of synergy between the way that we work, and we try and lend our expertise to their processes and vice versa. So it's something that is often brought up when we talk about the use of AI, which is, is that relationship necessary for that interaction, and therefore we try and err on the human side. Wouldn't say it's much of a process map at this stage, as the technology is changing a bit too fast, I feel, to nail something down, because we're also trying to stay on that sort of frontier of the tech. So we don't want to draw a diagram out and then find ourselves in a conversation where a problem we feel has needed a human element maybe actually doesn't anymore because someone solved it with new technology.
Well, one of the things that everybody has talked about for years is automating away all of the simple customer inquiries, the password reset, this kind of thing. But this existed long before the AI boom of the last 3 years. If you go back to the pandemic, everybody was talking about robotic process automation, and then even before that, there were chatbots that would handle simple inquiries. But we've never seen all of that simple work completely go away. So do you think that now we have a better opportunity, because it's clearly like a step change when you can use generative AI?
I think it's a really interesting point, actually. I mean, as an IT guy, specifically about password resets, self-service password reset has been a possibility for the entire time I've probably been in the business. And you still will have people wanting to phone up to reset a password, and there's so many elements to why that might be the case. But a lot of the time, I was thinking about this the other day, I'm starting to feel like we're introducing all this technology to people, and if I think about it from an agent point of view, we're asking the customer to use another process and another system, and we do that regularly enough. Certainly at the moment, maybe in the industry, it feels like, as a user, there's another way to do the thing I want to do almost every time I log on to one of the the big platforms. And I'm wondering if we sort of fall back on that. I just want to ring someone and speak to someone until it's sorted, because that's something that everyone knows how to do. Everyone knows how to have that conversation with another person, and they know what they want, but we've presented them another way to get to it now, and maybe they don't have the time to figure out this new process, or maybe it's not been made clear enough to them on the website, or however they're getting to that end goal. Just a thought that pops into my head the other day is maybe one of the reasons that chat hasn't taken over all of the voice work. Similarly to your earlier points about AI taking over loads and loads of tasks. Yeah, it's been said many times through the industry, and I remember when digital messaging and chat was, the rumors were that it was just going to wipe out all the voice, and it certainly hasn't. And I wonder if that's people's frustration with chat interactions, or people's frustration with digital, and it boils down to, we're giving them another way to do it, and maybe people just don't want to. Maybe people just don't have the time to get into it, or they're frustrated by the experience that it presents, even though if they got into it, the experience itself, the tool itself, would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I think, because you see some big brands like Amazon and Apple that have fantastic reputations for their interactions with customers, but they have very few channels. They kind of just focus on maybe one or only two channels, whereas the received the conventional wisdom of the last decade or so has been expand and, serve your customers on Snapchat, serve your customers on X, be where your customers are. So it's an interesting point that might be affecting AI adoption. Customers see it just as another channel they need to understand. Let's look at this idea then around the simpler contacts being automated away. I mean, if eventually we do see this starting to happen at a greater scale, doesn't that then change the nature of the human interactions? If all, not all, but if most of the simpler interactions are automated, then surely it means you're dealing with difficult problems, troubleshooting, emotional customers, this kind of thing. So that sort of changes the role of the human agent as well. I mean, they definitely need to be more skilled to handle these kind of interactions.
We're reaching a point where behavioral training and sort of, I'm not sure what the correct terminologies for this kind of training are really, but um, you know, emotional training and guidance on how to handle complex situations are becoming more and more valuable, helping people understand, helping agents, helping team leaders, helping team managers understand, the person element has always been really important in our industry. But as you're quite right, as we remove those quick fire interactions, all conversations may end up becoming, longer or larger in scale, or may impact more elements of a customer's account or a customer's experience. So being able to manage that complexity and communicate clearly whilst still showing empathy, are becoming more important than ever, I think.
Does that mean we also need to change some of the metrics? Because clearly we're going to worry less about handle time if we're handling more complex problems.
Yeah, I feel like it's certainly a shift that's been happening, I would say, over the last few years, with a focus, less of a focus not necessarily on agent efficiency, but less of a focus on individual contact length. AHT obviously is the big one. If all our conversations are complicated, then that AHT, of course, will be higher. But there may be some new measures coming in terms of, customer experience at the end of the interaction, or how many of the customer's queries we feel we were able to resolve during that interaction. These sorts of things will become more prevalent. And that's more about customer happiness and customer experience, which is very much what we should focus on, especially when those interactions with a human will be fewer and further between. We want to make sure that it's the best experience that we can give.
I've seen some of the software companies that are offering like automation for contact centers. They make claims that we are using our own software to handle our customer service, and it handles 97% of all inquiries. But this kind of gives the impression that building AI into your customer support is almost just like unboxing some software and switching it on. When you're talking to a client about building a solution for them, surely you must be talking about quality assurance and regulation, compliance, security, all of these other factors that wrap together into a service. So how do we sort of push on beyond this idea that actually it's very simple to add this?
I think to some degree, the perception that it's simple because it's buying a piece of software, at its basest element, is not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. I think there's certainly a knowledge gap in terms of the reality of integrations. I feel like now as a market, more and more companies have tried to go down the path of implementing an AI tool in some degree in some parts of their business. So I feel like as a market, we now have a bit of an understanding that it isn't as simple as the white papers may have made it seem when the boom first started. I think there are a lot of questions still for me outstanding on what kind of governance you should have as a business to ensure that any AI implementation is being done appropriately, it's being done safely, and it's being done in the most effective way possible. And that the tool itself is the most effective it can be for your departments. There's quite a few different elements there. You've got your typical governance people and teams, and your information security, processes, and those should be adapted for this new approach. And you've got your knowledge management, which is sort of more and more becoming an element of the QA departments. It fits really well within their wheelhouse. The knowledge that the tooling has to be concise, it has to be accurate, and it has to be suited to your task and your line of business. There's a lot of early adoption was feed it as much data as possible, feed the models as much data as possible, and we'll have something that works. And that has been, in my experience, very much not true. We've needed to scale back the knowledge that we've passed into these models. We've needed to choose which interactions needs to be fed in and things like that. And so there needs to be an element of that in any implementation. I feel knowledge management is crucial, because you can't feed the wrong information out to the advisor. It's the same experience as if you've got a CRM system that's giving them a different customer's information because of a system error somewhere, or it's giving you the wrong price. And we can have the same impact with models, except we've spent tens of thousands more on something that should have improved efficiency and may, in that instance, have created a complaint or additional handling time for the agent to do the work manually anyway. So accuracy is really key, definitely.
Once you are automating some of your interactions with customers, then you need to trust that the system has got accurate information. It's handling the customers correctly. What sort of risk profile do you think that there is? Like once you start relying on the software to interact with your customers, what are the things that you worry about in that scenario?
I think there's probably not much more risk exposure in an agent interaction to an AI interaction. And I think that is because at the end of the day, an agent can make a decision to talk to a customer about something that is, well, not a decision, I suppose, certainly, but the agent may have a conversation with the customer based on inaccurate information. And an AI model may have the same kind of interaction with that customer. It is slightly easier to see in most cases that an AI model has given inaccurate information, because you can track those conversations in real time, much you can with voice transcription now. In terms of exposure, it's probably quite similar, provided you have done the appropriate governance checks on your software that you're purchasing, and you ensure that the guardrails that you've set up in terms of what data it can access and how it processes each interaction's information being quite important. Of course, you see all these news stories about how an individual user managed to expose thousands of pieces of customer information by using ChatGPT and asking it the right questions, and all of this really dangerous sounding stuff. But happily, in our industry, the tools are at least built with some semblance of guardrails out of the box. What companies need to do, and what our teams are doing at the moment, are spending a lot more time worrying about the guardrails before an application is released, and making sure that we've really tested it. Software testing has always been a big part of information security, and we're sort of into a new realm of it now. We've got a team of people doing software testing for AI-led interactions to try and ask strange questions or give interesting prompts and try and bypass the way that the model has been programmed to speak to people. It's an evolution, I think, of the same risks that we've always been aware of. Previously, it would be managing agents' behavior and accuracy and their checking of the information that they're talking about. It's very much the same now. We're just reviewing transcripts and interactions with AI models, and we're doing training and knowledge-based management to try and improve those answers and make sure that they are right.
And it's interesting because if you look at the news coverage of corporate AI use, there does seem to be some companies that are walking back and saying once they start analyzing the token consumption, they realize they're actually spending thousands of dollars per user per month for these systems. And it would actually be just cheaper to have a well-trained team of humans working on the projects. So, I mean, is that something that you're seeing happen? Or do you think that people are finally realizing the real cost of implementing these systems? Because I guess everyone just looks at ChatGPT or Gemini on their phone and thinks that this stuff is free.
Yeah, I mean, that last point you've made is definitely true, and I've faced some of that challenge myself. In terms of perception. Well, I can use it on my phone, so why does it cost this much money to implement? And the answer is simple, really. Is as a consumer, as a person, those interactions are only a risk really to you and your own understanding. But you're buying a piece of software that's going to represent your business, and you would always train an agent and an advisor usually quite a long amount of time before you would ever ask them to speak to a customer. And it's the same for AI tooling. So there's a lot of cost there. There's a lot of cost in the software build and the implementation. Training the models is quite a large part of most professional services implementation plans I think I've seen. And that's good. That is absolutely how it should be. And then we have the real cost. So the market at the moment for hardware is easily the worst I've ever seen it. And that is all primarily down to the supply and demand of memory and high performance computing elements which are involved in delivering these AI models. And it's sort of reminiscent of the large push we had in maybe 10 or so years ago, where everyone wanted to move everything into the cloud. And there were loads of benefits to doing that. But the costs have slowly risen over the years, much faster than I feel the hardware costs have risen. So, if you wanted those benefits, you're paying quite a premium now. And it's still true. And there was a big walk back a couple of years ago of that, where a lot of people pushed back to on-premise because of the cost of hosting everything in the cloud. And we're sort of not quite there yet with AI, I don't feel. I feel we're still in the phase of the software itself. For instance, Copilot or ChatGPT's sort of business end licensing. I feel we're sort of still in the sweet spot where the technology is accessible, and it's accessible at a low cost. But based on the hardware market, to go back to my point there, the companies delivering this will be having to buy this hardware at these extortionate prices that we're currently seeing. And I don't get the impression from any vendors that I've spoken to that they're expecting the hardware costs to go down. So the cost of the delivery of this kind of technology has only increased over the last 2 years. And we haven't really seen any changes in the pricing structure, I don't feel, in those couple of years. But at some point, companies delivering it will need to recoup their profits or improve their margins. And where we are, where we are now to where we are in 12, 18 months, I think we're going to start seeing some significantly increased costs on most implementations or models, especially as more and more companies act to use the capacity that's available to us there. The providers will need to continue to catch up.
This level of sophistication, I mean, it's very hard for small and medium-sized companies to have access to this kind of expertise. So is that really where like a modern BPO can really add a lot of value in like knitting together the technology, the governance and the security all into one sort of solution?
It's very true of our industry that we've always had to be incredibly compliant. Companies can trust themselves to execute a task, but there'll always be additional governance that they'll want or assurance that they'll want when they outsource a task that ultimately still impacts their reputation. So obviously, as a market, we've always been held to a really high number of standards. You've got your PCI DSS, your Cyber Essentials Plus, your ISO 27001 and other ISO standards relating to sort of services. There's loads of compliance requirements for us, and we are sort of, I guess, at the forefront in terms of governance for AI technologies. And that is because ultimately the data risk or the risk that it presents to the customer's perception in the market is still with us if we're using that tooling. So we've had to ensure absolutely that we think about what possible risks there are and implement mechanisms to protect customer image well ahead of where the market itself has gotten to in terms of regulation. There is still not a sort of comparable. There's no concept to AI really in the current version of the PCI DSS, and we're seeing it starting to be sort of dripped out in various different levels of governance. So certainly from what I've seen so far, we're already doing the right things, which is great. It's great to see, and I'm sure that's true for the rest of our sector. But yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of our partners, and we've had quite a sort of synergistic model in terms of how are we going to approach this project. We all agree we want to use AI for this project, but how are we going to use it? How are we going to make sure it's safe? And we've all come to the same sort of conclusions, which is great. But it's definitely been an interesting one to build up that governance without really a best practice, coming from the government. This is how it should be done, like we've seen with everything else over the years.
Okay, I mean, just to wrap up then, I wanted to ask about the structure at Interact, because it's an employee-owned company, and I don't think I've seen that in many BPOs at all, actually, certainly not in the UK. Does that structure change the way that you think about structural technology changes like the introduction of AI?
I'm quite happy to say that Interact as a whole has always been quite an employee-focused business. I've been here 10 years now, and I've seen many iterations of projects and learning and development courses that are directly related to the people and helping them learn new things and progress and develop. And that ethos has worked really well into us becoming an employee-owned trust. It's put it front and center, a little bit more front and center than it already was. And yeah, it has definitely helped us structure our AI approach. So our current sort of ethos on it is AI enabled but people led, and that goes right back to the first sort of few points we were talking about in improving the ability to trust the engagements that you're having with our agents and our advisors by utilizing the AI tools to make them as effective as they can be in doing their jobs and really help them see and touch the information that they need exactly at the right time during those customer interactions.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Xperience Alliance CX Leaders podcast. Please share the podcast on your favorite social network, as this helps us to spread the word about these CX stories. For more information about the CX Alliance, please visit our LinkedIn page. Just search LinkedIn for the Customer Xperience Alliance, and the search works a bit better if you drop the E at the start of experience.